Canada just broke the most powerful country on earth. Not with missiles, not with an alliance, with patience. 48 hours ago, Donald Trump walked to a podium inside the White House briefing room, read from a script word for word without a single deviation, and surrendered. Not negotiated, not compromised, surrendered. Every tariff on Canadian goods lifted. The demand for Prime Minister Carney to resign, pulled back. The push for Canadian uranium oversight, dropped. The pressure on copper pricing, abandoned. 18 months of economic warfare against a neighbor 1/10 America's size ended not with a deal, but with a capitulation so total that the White House press room sat in stunned silence for 4 full seconds after the president stopped talking. If you want to understand how a medium-sized country defeated the most powerful economic force in modern history, stay with me. Because what happened in the 12 hours before that podium moment is the part nobody is covering. If you follow geopolitics and you are not subscribed yet, hit that button now, because we break these stories down daily, not weekly, not monthly, every single day. 18 months earlier, Canada had a problem. The tariffs started hitting. Lumber costs passed through to American home buyers. Auto parts costs passed through to American car buyers. Canadian farm goods passed through to grocery bills in every border state. Every dollar of economic pressure America aimed at Canada boomeranged back into American pockets. But the White House held firm because it believed what most people believe about power, that the bigger economy always wins. That assumption was the first and most fatal mistake. Because while Washington was focused on applying pressure, Ottawa was building a trap. 3 days before the cabinet collapsed, Mark Carney stood in the House of Commons and announced the Canadian Strategic Resource Authority, a single sovereign body given legal control over every strategic Canadian export: oil, natural gas, electricity, uranium, copper, nickel, cobalt, lithium, potash, rare earth elements, timber, hydroelectric power. Canada sits in the top 5 global producers of nearly every item on that list. All of it, every kilogram, every barrel, every megawatt, now under one institution with the legal authority to set prices, choose buyers, impose conditions, and cut off supply to any nation deemed a threat to Canadian economic or national security. The House of Commons passed it 338 votes to 0, unanimous. For the second time during the dispute, markets understood before the politicians did. Within 90 minutes of Carney's announcement, West Texas crude jumped 6%. Natural gas futures surged 11%. Uranium spot prices, already elevated from earlier redirected supply deals, climbed another 9%. Copper, nickel, and lithium futures each rose between 4 and 7%. The S&P 500 dropped 2.8% in a single session. Goldman Sachs issued an emergency client note calling the Canadian Strategic Resource Authority the largest structural shift in North American commodity markets since NAFTA. One former U.S. trade official described it as your supplier putting a combination lock on every product you buy from them and handing the key to a board you have zero influence over. But here is what most analysts are missing. The Canadian Strategic Resource Authority was not the blow that ended this. It was the final weight added to a structure that was already collapsing under 18 months of self-inflicted damage. And once you understand what that damage actually looked like inside American homes, American hospitals, and American military planning rooms, you will understand why the cabinet did not recommend surrendering. They told the president continuing was no longer possible. Subscribe if you are watching this for the first time, because the next part is where this story gets truly unsettling. Michigan, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Maine had all declared official energy emergencies. Natural gas prices across the Midwest had doubled. Heating oil hit 10-year highs. Households in New England were spending a quarter of their monthly income on winter heating alone. 47,000 electrical contracting jobs were gone because copper tariffs had doubled wiring costs. David Kowalski in Grand Rapids still sat at his kitchen table running numbers that could not balance, still unable to afford the copper wiring his contracts required. $8 billion had drained from the construction sector in the first year alone. 14 hospital builds delayed. School districts deferring safety upgrades. Data centers quietly relocating to Canada, financed in part by the same tariffs America had imposed. 37,000 of the most highly trained, skilled tradespeople in the Western Hemisphere had returned to Canada with signing bonuses paid for by American tariff revenue. The uranium situation was no longer a trade issue. 93 nuclear reactors generating 20% of American electricity now faced supply uncertainty that the Pentagon had formally labeled a threat to military readiness. None of this was temporary. Every month the dispute continued, the damage compounded. And every month it compounded, the political cost of continuing rose faster than the economic cost of stopping. The emergency cabinet meeting began at 6 in the evening and was scheduled for 90 minutes. It ran for 5 hours. The Treasury Secretary placed a classified economic review on the table, compiled in the prior 72 hours, and told the president that if the dispute continued through winter under the new Canadian resource framework, GDP would contract in the first quarter by an estimated 1.4%. The first negative GDP quarter since the pandemic. Unemployment in construction, energy, and manufacturing would reach levels not seen since the financial crisis. He reportedly said, and these are the words 3 people in that room confirmed, "Sir, the economy cannot survive another quarter like this. That is not opinion, that is arithmetic." The Energy Secretary gave his briefing next. Scheduled blackouts were now projected across 11 states during peak winter demand if Canadian energy flows were not restored. Natural gas reserves sat at their lowest pre-winter level in 8 years. Rationing protocols for New England, not seen since the 1970s, were already drafted and ready to implement. His resignation letter was written, signed, and in his jacket pocket throughout the entire presentation. He only withdrew it after the decision to yield was confirmed. Then the Defense Secretary spoke, and by every account from people who were present, this is the moment the room changed. He told the president that the uranium supply issue was no longer a commerce matter. It was a readiness matter. That naval reactor fuel timelines were under stress, that the strategic reserve planning assumptions no longer reflected functional supply chains. And then he said, "I cannot represent to Congress that our nuclear deterrent is unaffected, and I will not misrepresent it." The room went quiet. A senior political advisor, someone who had been with Trump since the first campaign, delivered what multiple attendees called the most direct statement ever made to the president in a private setting. "Sir, we can absorb a bad trade deal. We cannot simultaneously absorb a recession, rolling blackouts, and a nuclear readiness crisis during a midterm election year. Not once, not ever. It is over." Trump pushed back for the first hour. He proposed more tariffs. The Treasury Secretary told him that would accelerate the damage. He proposed declaring the Canadian Resource Authority an act of economic warfare. His communications director told him 53% of the public already blamed the White House, and the number was rising. One by one, every remaining option closed. Then the room went still, and the president said nothing, for what 3 separate witnesses estimated as 2 to 3 minutes. The longest unbroken silence anyone in that room had ever witnessed from him. When he finally spoke, he used 4 words. Draft the statement. Fine. Trump's statement ran 812 words. It took 4 minutes and 30 seconds. His eyes never left the teleprompter, not once. The language declared the lifting of all tariffs, the end of all demands, the beginning of a new bilateral framework built on, and this is critical, Canadian diplomatic phrasing, mirroring Canadian priorities, reflecting Canadian terms. Carney's response was 63 words. No banners, no officials, no ceremony. He welcomed the American decision to resume respectful dealings, expressed anticipation for a new partnership framework built on mutual respect and sovereign equality, and noted that Canada had long been ready for that conversation. He did not mention Trump. He did not mention the tariffs. He did not mention the resignation demand, the port pressure, the uranium standoff, the worker dispute, or any single one of the 11 major escalations that defined 18 months of the most aggressive economic conflict between allied nations in the post-war era. 63 words, as if 18 months of damage was simply weather that had passed. That restraint was not diplomacy. That restraint was dominance. A leader who has won does not need to say so. Carney's silence on everything he had achieved said more than any victory speech could have, because when you are certain of the outcome from the beginning, you do not celebrate the ending, you simply move forward. And that, the absolute calm of someone who was never in doubt, is the most unsettling thing about this entire story. Warren Buffett gave the only summary that truly captures what occurred. He said he had witnessed three categories of loss across 70 years in business. Loss by force, rare, visible, recoverable. Loss by error, common, painful, correctable. And loss by exhaustion, the most devastating kind. When the opposing side does not try to overpower you, but simply removes your options one at a time, calmly, methodically, until you look around and realize there is nowhere left to move. He paused. Then he said, "That is what happened to the United States." Carney never tried to beat Trump. He simply took away every choice until only one remained. Trump needed 812 words to explain a surrender. Carney needed 63 to accept a victory. That ratio tells you everything about who was in control of this story from the very first tariff to the very last word. The question that remains, and the one that will define the next decade of Western geopolitics, is not what Canada won. It is what every other mid-sized nation with strategic resources just learned about how to face a larger power that leads with pressure instead of partnership. Because they were all watching, and they all took notes. If this breakdown gave you a sharper understanding of what actually happened and why it matters beyond the headlines, share it with one person who needs to see it. Drop your take in the comments. Do you think other nations will now follow Canada's playbook? And if you are not subscribed yet, this is the kind of daily analysis you will not find packaged this clearly anywhere else. Hit subscribe, and you will not miss what comes next.